Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and appreciate each of y'all being here today. There's a number of issues and ramifications at stake in what we're talking about, but I want to focus on the first and most basic issue, and that is whether Congress should affirm and update the authorization for the use of military force that was passed in September 2001. And as Mr. Engel referenced in his testimony, there's been some criticism of the section in the House-passed bill, Section 1034. Some people say, well, the courts, you are just adopting the court interpretation of the AUMF, so you really don't need to do it. It doesn't change anything. Just let the courts continue to adapt and interpret the September 2001 authorization. A second criticism, which is kind of coming from the opposite way, is that, oh, this is a vast new expansion of power with no limits of time or geography. So I would appreciate each of you giving us your opinion on whether Congress should affirm and update the authorization for the use of military force, and whether you think either of those criticisms have merit. Do you think that it's okay for courts to interpret when the United States can use military force? And are you concerned about some vast expansion? And Professor Chesney, if I may, since somebody's from the University of Texas Law School, hook 'em, I'd ask you to go first.
First, one of the issues that lurks in the background that we've not probably paid enough attention to is the fact that the existence of ongoing relatively conventional conflict in Afghanistan has made it relatively easy for everyone to agree that there's at least some combat going on somewhere that entitles us to detain somebody. It's entirely foreseeable that in the next year or two, for better or worse, that may not still be the case. And when that situation develops, when that is, our situation in Afghanistan is similar to our current situation in Iraq. We're drawing down, we're leaving, we're no longer engaging in sustained combat operations. There will be an argument that will emerge that there's no longer authority under the original AUMF to detain anywhere. I think it would be a very smart move on the part of Congress to clarify that for purposes of our domestic law, we do not condition our detention authority with respect to al-Qaeda on the existence of combat operations in Afghanistan. And this is something that Congress could head off by making clear there's detention authority and it's not linked in that way. A second issue is the question of whether it's even possible by statute to tamp down the debate over what's the scope of the authorization. Everybody agrees al-Qaeda counts, the Taliban counts. But when push comes to shove and people start getting down in the weeds, they often don't really agree about what they think the boundaries of al-Qaeda actually are and whether it encompasses various affiliated groups. The question of the moment, as the chairman indicated in the opening remarks, AQAP, al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, may be the greatest threat we face. There's debate about the extent to which it's encompassed by the existing AUMF. The administration takes the position, I believe, that AQAP is effectively part of al-Qaeda. And that may be the right interpretation. There's going to be debate about that. It's not clear if and when there's an AQAP detention that the courts necessarily will agree with that. It might be wise to eliminate that sort of uncertainty. But then you have even more difficult groups like al-Shabaab, where the ties, whatever they are relatively looser by a considerable amount than they are as between al-Qaeda and AQAP. In that circumstance, a difficult question that I'm not sure can be eliminated by statute will remain as to which groups are sufficiently associated with the AUMF named groups to count. The current House-passed version of the NDAA confirms the administration's position that associated forces, co-belligerents, are encompassed, but it doesn't actually define that term. And I'm not exactly sure how best to define that term. That may be some indeterminacy that's just built into this framework.
Mr. Engel?
Sure. Thank you. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, I think it's very important that Congress take this on. Essentially, the AUMF isn't only about who we detain. It has been elaborated and interpreted by the courts in the context of the Guantanamo habeas litigation, but it also affects who we target. So it basically is the definition of who we are fighting in this war. And I think it's very important and appropriate in our constitutional structure that the political branches, and particularly Congress, take a lead role in making these determinations. When we talk about what are the courts saying, what are the courts doing, the courts are trying to figure out what Congress meant when it passed the AUMF almost 10 years ago now. And I think it's very important and appropriate for Congress to weigh in and to clarify, basically by making clear it agrees with the views of the executive branch, because this goes really to the heart of who we're fighting and our national security.
Thank you. Mr. Dell'Orto?
I would echo what Mr. Engel and Professor Chesney have said. I think one of the keys here is that we need to be looking forward rather than rearward. And to the extent that we have demonstrations of how al-Qaeda and its branches and sequels are unfolding, we need to be prepared to address that. And I think that anything that would limit the scope of our activities to certainly Afghanistan would put us in a position where we will not be ready for the emergence of the next branch or sequel. And in point of fact, it would acknowledge what we're doing today. We have these operations taking place in many parts of the world, and I think we need to maintain the authority to do so. I also agree that the courts should not be the place where this is determined. I think the courts rightfully, they've been drawn into this somewhat reluctantly, I think, are doing their best to interpret what Congress has established by way of the law. And the more clarity we can establish through legislation, I think the better off everyone will be.
Judge?
I agree with the comments of the prior speakers. I would add only two things. First of all, this question of what it is that allows us to continue to detain has not been passed on by the courts as yet, and I think that Professor Chesney makes an important point in saying that we ought to head that off right now. It's because having that argument advanced could result in freeing an enormous number of people who should never see the light of day. Secondly, the notion of defining a list of organizations that are against us and then checking whether somebody is or isn't on the list and making targeting decisions on that basis and capture decisions on that basis simply doesn't work. Al-Qaeda and those associated with them don't care who's on the list, and this is not a motorcycle gang with who wear jackets that are emblazoned with a particular label, and as soon as we kill off everybody who's wearing the jacket, we win. They didn't care on 9/11 whether we had anybody on a list or not, and they're not going to care now. You need to look no further, I should say, than the Times Square bomber Faisal Shahzad. When he was captured, it turned out he was associated with the Pakistani Taliban. That wasn't on the list, and there was actually a debate about whether we had authority to hold him. That shouldn't happen. Anwar al-Awlaki was self-radicalized in the United States, is now in a leadership position in AQAP. Again, somebody who may not neatly fit a category, but somebody who is undeniably at war with this country, and we should be equally free to oppose the people who are at war with us.